They called him the Angel of Death. But he wasn't looking to save souls, he was looking for a way to play God. Auschwitz-Birkenau, 1943. The selection ramp. A train pulls in carrying thousands of Hungarian Jews. The doors slide open, chaos, screaming, families torn apart, armed guards shouting orders, dogs barking, smoke from the crematoria visible in the distance, and then, whistling. A man in an immaculate SS uniform steps forward. Polished boots, white gloves, a conductor's baton in one hand. He's whistling opera, Wagner usually. His favorite. He points left. Death in the gas chambers within hours. He points right. Death through slave labor within weeks. But sometimes he stops. His eyes light up. He's spotted something. Twins. Step forward, he says gently in German, almost kindly. You're special. You're going to help me with very important scientific work. The children don't know it yet, but they've just been selected for something far worse than the gas chambers. They've become the property of Dr. Josef Mengele, the most sadistic medical experimenter in human history. While the world was at war, one man was conducting a secret war inside the gates of Auschwitz. He didn't use bullets, he used scalpels. His obsession? Twins. He believed that if he could crack the genetic code of twinning, he could double the birth rate of the Aryan race. Create a master race that would rule for 1,000 years. But the price of his science was paid in blood. From sewing two children together to see if their organs would merge, to injecting blue dye directly into the eyes of conscious infants, to infecting one twin with typhus just to see how long the other would survive. The horrors committed by Josef Mengele are so dark, so incomprehensibly cruel, that history almost tried to bury them. Tonight, we go behind the iron gates. We look at the files the Nazis tried to burn. We examine the testimony of the few children who survived. And we ask the most disturbing question of all: how did this monster escape justice for 34 years while living openly under his own name? This is the story of the Angel of Death, and once you hear it, you'll understand why some evils are so profound, they never truly die. Munich, Germany, 1911. Josef Mengele was born into wealth. His father owned a farm equipment manufacturing company that would make the family rich. Young Joseph wanted for nothing. He was handsome, charming, intelligent, popular with classmates, a gifted student. Nothing in his childhood screamed, future mass murderer. He studied medicine and anthropology at the universities of Munich, Bonn, and Frankfurt. By 1935, he'd earned not one but two doctorates, one in medicine, one in anthropology. His dissertation focused on racial differences in jaw structures. Even then, he was obsessed with proving the genetic superiority of the Aryan race. He joined the Nazi Party in 1937, the SS in 1938. It wasn't reluctant, it wasn't coerced. He was a true believer. When World War II broke out, Mengele served as a medical officer with the Wehrmacht. He was wounded on the Eastern Front and declared unfit for combat duty. Instead of being sent home, he was offered a new position, Auschwitz. He arrived in May 1943, and from that moment until January 1945, he had unlimited access to something no scientist in history had ever possessed: an endless supply of human subjects who could be experimented on without consent, without anesthesia, and without consequence. No ethics boards, no oversight, no accountability. Just a man with 2 PhD degrees, a God complex, and a burning desire to rewrite human genetics. The first thing survivors remember is how different he was from the other SS officers. While others screamed and beat prisoners with rifle butts, Mengele was calm, polite even. He never raised his voice. He wore white gloves that he changed multiple times a day to avoid contamination. His uniform was always spotless. His boots gleamed. He looked like what the Nazis wanted their master race to embody: tall, dark-haired, handsome, refined, cultured. A man of science and breeding. But his eyes, survivors would later say, his eyes were dead, empty, like looking into a void. He worked the selection ramp with enthusiasm. Most SS doctors hated the duty, taking turns to minimize their time there. Not Mengele. He volunteered for extra shifts. He would stand for hours, conducting his orchestra of death with a flick of his baton. Left, left, right, left. But when he spotted twins, everything changed. His face would brighten. He'd approach them personally. Sometimes he'd give the children candy. Tell them they were going to a special place, that they'd get extra food, better treatment. And technically, he wasn't lying. Twins in Mengele's program did get better food. He needed them healthy for his experiments. They weren't gassed immediately. They lived in special barracks. But they wished they'd been sent left. The twins were housed in a separate barracks away from the main camp population. From the outside, it almost looked like special treatment. Inside was a different story. Children aged 2 to 16, all twins or anyone else, Mengele found interesting. Dwarfs, people with unusual physical features, those with heterochromia, different colored eyes. They called him Uncle Mengele. He'd encouraged it. He'd visit the barracks with chocolates and toys. He'd play with the children, ask about their families, learn their names, and then he'd take them to the medical block. Most never came back. Those who did came back changed. Traumatized beyond words. Infected with diseases, missing organs, covered in stitches. Some with their eyes bandaged because he'd injected chemicals directly into their irises, trying to change their eye color to Aryan blue. The experiments had no anesthesia. Children were strapped to tables, conscious and screaming, while Mengele calmly took notes. If they cried too much, he'd have them gagged. If they died during the procedure, he'd shrug and order their twin brought in for autopsy. He wanted to compare their organs side by side. This wasn't medicine. This wasn't even pseudo-science. This was sadism wearing a lab coat. Eva Moses Kor, one of the few surviving twins, later testified about what happened inside Mengele's laboratory. "We were treated like laboratory animals," she said. "Injected with diseases, operated on without anesthesia, observed until we died so he could perform autopsies." The experiments varied, but several patterns emerged. The eye color experiments. Mengele was obsessed with creating blue eyes in brown-eyed subjects. He believed if he could change eye color, he could perfect the Aryan race. He'd inject methylene blue dye directly into children's eyes. No anesthetic, no sedation. The children would scream as the chemical burned their corneas. Most went blind. Many developed severe infections and died. Not a single experiment succeeded in permanently changing eye color. The twin studies. His ultimate goal was understanding how to increase the Germanic birth rate through twinning. He'd perform simultaneous experiments on both twins to see how their bodies reacted differently. One twin would be infected with typhus, the other used as a control. When the infected twin died, he'd immediately kill the healthy twin and perform comparative autopsies. He was looking for genetic markers, for anything that could be replicated. The surgical experiments. This is where it gets even darker. Witness testimony and recovered notes suggest Mengele attempted to artificially create conjoined twins by surgically connecting blood vessels and organs between two children. The operations were crude, done without proper sterilization or technique. The children died within days from infection and trauma. He tried it multiple times. It never worked. He didn't care. The pressure and altitude tests. Borrowed from Luftwaffe research, these experiments placed subjects in compression chambers that simulated high-altitude conditions. The goal was to see how much pressure change a human could survive before their organs ruptured. Children were placed in sealed chambers while air pressure was rapidly decreased. Their eardrums would burst. Blood vessels would rupture. Many died from brain hemorrhages. Mengele would watch through a window, taking notes. The sterilization experiments, part of Nazi eugenics policy, was preventing undesirable populations from reproducing. Mengele tested various sterilization methods: chemical injections, radiation exposure, surgical castration, all without anesthesia. The goal was finding the fastest, cheapest method to sterilize millions. The limb exchange surgeries. Perhaps the most grotesque experiments involved attempting to transplant limbs between twins to see if genetic similarity would prevent rejection. Arms were amputated from one child and sewn onto another. Legs were swapped. The surgeries were done without understanding of tissue typing or immunosuppression. Every subject died from either shock, blood loss, or infection. Dr. Miklos Niesli, a Jewish prisoner doctor forced to assist Mengele, later wrote, "I witnessed experiments that no human being should ever see." Mengele treated human beings as laboratory rats. When one died, he'd simply order another brought in. He showed no emotion, no remorse. He was completely detached from the suffering he caused. And here's the most chilling part. Mengele documented everything meticulously. He kept detailed records, photographs, organ samples, He believed his research would one day be recognized as groundbreaking. He thought he was a pioneer. He was simply a monster given a laboratory. January 1945. The Red Army was closing in from the east. Nazi Germany was collapsing. The camps were being evacuated. Tens of thousands of prisoners were forced on death marches westward. Mengele knew what was coming. He'd committed crimes that even other Nazis found disturbing. If he were captured, there would be no defense, no just following orders. His experiments went far beyond military necessity or wartime policy. He began destroying evidence. He burned research files, destroyed photographs, had prisoner assistants shot to eliminate witnesses. He took his most valuable research notes, years of data from thousands of experiments, packed them into a small trunk, and prepared to disappear. On January 17, 1945, as Soviet artillery could be heard in the distance, Josef Mengele walked out of Auschwitz. He would never face trial for his crimes there. After the war, Mengele hid in plain sight. He lived under his own name in Germany for 4 years, working as a farmhand. He was briefly captured by American forces but released. They didn't know who he was. His name wasn't yet on any war criminal lists. But by 1949, as Auschwitz survivors began testifying and his name surfaced repeatedly, arrest warrants were issued. That's when Mengele ran. He fled to South America using the Ratlines, secret networks run by sympathetic clergy and former Nazi intelligence officers that smuggled war criminals out of Europe. First stop, Argentina. He lived openly in Buenos Aires under his real name. He worked at a pharmaceutical company. He socialized with other German expatriates. He even obtained Argentine citizenship. This wasn't some clandestine fugitive life. He lived comfortably, arrogantly, believing South America would never extradite him. And he was right. In 1959, Germany issued an international arrest warrant. Argentina refused to act. When pressure mounted, Mengele simply moved to Paraguay, then Brazil. Meanwhile, Nazi hunters, including Mossad, Israel's intelligence service, were closing in. They'd successfully captured Adolf Eichmann in Argentina in 1960. Mengele was next on their list. But fate intervened. Mossad had to choose: divert resources to capture Mengele or focus on other high-value targets. They chose others. Some historians believe they knew where Mengele was but lacked the assets to grab him. Others suggest they simply prioritized differently. Either way, Mengele kept running. By the 1960s, he was living in rural Brazil under the assumed name Wolfgang Gerhard. He moved constantly, paranoid, isolated. His marriage fell apart. His family in Germany cut off contact. The money dried up. The man who once stood on the selection ramp deciding who lived and who died was now living in a shack, sick with anxiety, haunted by his past. But he was free. Here's where the story takes a strange turn. In the small Brazilian town of Cândido Godói, something unusual happens. The town has an abnormally high rate of twin births, nearly 10% of all births, compared to the global average of 1 to 2%. And Josef Mengele lived there. In the early 1960s, while hiding in rural Brazil, Mengele posed as a traveling veterinarian. He visited farms, treated animals, and sometimes offered medical advice to locals. Several elderly residents remember a German doctor who gave vitamins and medications to pregnant women, who seemed very interested in local genetics, who asked unusual questions about family histories. After his death, researchers discovered the twin phenomenon in Cândido Godói and made the connection. Was this Mengele's final experiment? Did he somehow continue his twinning research in secret, using an isolated population? The scientific consensus says no. Genetic studies suggest the high twin rate is likely due to a founder effect. Isolated populations with limited genetic diversity often show unusual traits. But locals aren't so sure. They remember the German doctor. They remember the sudden increase in twins after his visits. We'll never know for certain. Mengele never confessed. His notes, if they still exist, have never been found. But the coincidence remains unsettling. February 7, 1979, Bertioga, Brazil. A beach resort south of São Paulo. A man matching Josef Mengele's description, though living under the name Wolfgang Gerhard, went swimming. He suffered a stroke in the water and drowned. His body was buried in a local cemetery under the false name. No one knew who he really was. For 6 more years, the world kept searching for the angel of death, not knowing he was already dead. In 1985, police acting on tips raided a house in São Paulo connected to Mengele's associates. They found letters, documents, and an address. That address led them to a grave. The body was exhumed. Forensic analysis, including dental records and bone structure, confirmed the identity. Josef Mengele had died free, comfortable, never prosecuted, never imprisoned, never forced to face his victims. He died the way he lived, escaping consequences. In 1992, DNA testing conclusively proved the remains were his. The case was finally closed. The monster was dead. But the horror remained. Not all of Mengele's subjects died. Eva Moses Kor and her twin sister Miriam survived. So did a handful of others. Eva spent the rest of her life educating people about the Holocaust. She founded the Candles organization, Children of Auschwitz, Nazi Deadly Lab Experiment Survivors. She gave lectures, wrote books, testified at trials. In 1995, she did something shocking. She publicly forgave the Nazis who had experimented on her. Not because they deserved it, she said, but because she refused to let them continue victimizing her for the rest of her life. Forgiveness, she explained, is not about the perpetrator. It's about the victim taking back power. Her sister Miriam wasn't so fortunate. The experiments left her with permanent kidney damage. She died in 1993 from cancer, likely caused by the injections Mengele gave her as a child. Other survivors remain anonymous, too traumatized to speak publicly. Some still have nightmares. Some can't discuss what happened even with family. The experiments didn't end when the camp was liberated. They continued in the minds and bodies of the survivors for the rest of their lives. Mengele's victims are almost all gone now. Eva Moses Kor died in 2019. The last living witnesses are in their 80s and 90s. Soon, there will be no one left who can say, "I was there. I survived. This is what he did to me." That's why we must never stop telling this story. Josef Mengele never faced justice in a courtroom. He never spent a day in prison. He never had to look his victims in the eye and answer for what he'd done. But his legacy lives on. Not as a scientist, not as a pioneer, but as a warning. A warning about what happens when medicine abandons ethics, when science serves ideology instead of humanity, when perfectly educated, intelligent people convince themselves that some lives matter less than others. Mengele wasn't an uneducated thug. He wasn't a sadistic outlier. He was a doctor, a PhD, a man who took an oath to do no harm, and he violated that oath in the most grotesque ways imaginable. His story reminds us that evil doesn't always announce itself with horns and fangs. Sometimes it wears a white coat, sometimes it smiles, sometimes it offers candy to children before leading them to their deaths. The experiments at Auschwitz contributed nothing to medical science. Not a single useful discovery came from Mengele's research. The data was worthless, methodologically flawed, unethical, and obtained under conditions that made the results meaningless. All that suffering, all those deaths, for nothing. But the lesson remains. This happened. Not in the ancient past, not in some mythical dark age. This happened within living memory, in a modern industrialized nation, by educated professionals. And if we forget, if we allow ourselves to think it could never happen again, we guarantee that it will. The final question, could it happen again? The answer is, it already is. Forced medical experiments on prisoners, unethical research on vulnerable populations, scientists justifying cruelty in the name of progress. These things still happen, in different forms, in different places, but the underlying logic is the same. Some people matter less than others. Some suffering is acceptable if it serves a greater good. Mengele believed he was serving the greater good. He believed his research would secure the future of the German people. He was wrong. There is no greater good that justifies torturing children, no scientific advancement worth the cost of human dignity, no ideology that makes one person's life worth less than another's. Josef Mengele died believing he'd been unfairly persecuted. He never expressed remorse. He never acknowledged the suffering he caused. He died a monster, but he started as a man who made choices, who prioritized ambition over empathy, who chose career advancement over moral responsibility. And that's the scariest part of all, because Josef Mengele proves that the capacity for absolute evil exists in ordinary people. In doctors, in scientists, in anyone who convinces themselves that the ends justify the means. The angel of death is dead. But the darkness he represents never truly dies. It waits, it watches, it looks for the next opportunity, the next justification, the next person willing to pick up the scalpel. Our job is to make sure it never finds one. If you made it to the end, comment "never again" below. Remember, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. And this is one chapter of history the world can never afford to forget.